verses 9 through 13. 5-verse session shouldn't be all that long, right? It's session number 42 in our study in Mark. Peter, James, and John had just seen a glimpse of what Jesus looked like with his glory. Something like, we don't know, but I assume that would be what Jesus will look like at his return. We'll see his full glory and seeing who he is. But they saw some glimpse of that, at least, something that no other human beings had experienced. They hadn't understood everything they experienced, I'm sure of that. Now that it was over and they were headed back down the mountain, probably anxious to tell everyone else what they had been privileged to see. But let's look at Mark 9:9. And as they were coming down from the mountain, he, Jesus, gave them orders not to relate to anyone what they had seen. Talk about something difficult. You just seen Jesus in his glory and you got to keep your lip buttoned until, here's a little bit of difference. When he told people not to talk about something, he never put a time limit on. Here he does. He gave them orders not to relate to anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man should rise from the dead. In other words, at his resurrection, then you will know enough to begin spreading the word about what you saw. It'll be okay then. Often Jesus had told people not to advertise what they had seen or experienced, but this time there was a release point at which the secrecy could end. But why give such a command at all? Wasn't Jesus' time growing short on earth? Well, the three would likely cause confusion if they tried to explain it. Peter, I'm sure, would cause some kind of confusion. Would they have understood the significance at all? We will find that they still did not understand what form Jesus' ministry was to take as the incarnation wound down. He was going to do what? He was going to solve man's sin problem. He was going to pave a way for a man to be right with God. And of course, that would require his death. And, true to form, Jesus would likely have caused people to try a Jesus true form, that is, if people thought they knew who he really was, they would probably try to force him to be the Messiah King immediately. That wasn't in the books, of course. Had it happened before? Sure. If you remember from John, he spoke of the fact that the 5,000 who were miraculously fed at one point, they wanted to do precisely that. But death and suffering were to be his fate, not being elevated to kingship. That will come, but it wasn't to come then. This is described in John 6, verses 14 and 15. When therefore the people, that's those from among the 5,000 who were still there, When the people saw the sign which he had performed, that was the feeding of the 5,000, they said, "This is of a truth the prophet who is to come into the world." That's the prophet that we spoke last time that Moses was predicting would come. A Jew who would be a prophet like him, and Moses advised, listen to him. Verse 15, Jesus, therefore, perceiving that they were intending to come and take him by force, to make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain to be by himself, to be alone. But even Jesus' brief command while sending down the mountain raised other issues with the three. They weren't going to argue about that, but they did seize upon what Jesus said, discussing with one another. What was the key? That Jesus said he would rise from the dead. What rising from the dead might mean. Now, certainly, all three of them knew what Jews in general knew, except the Sadducees apparently did not, but they knew about the resurrection of those in the kingdom of heaven. For example, in John 11, go back to John there, 23 and 24, this was when Jesus had come to deal with Lazarus' death. And the first person he encountered was Martha, Lazarus' sister. So Jesus said to her, Martha, your brother shall rise again. And Jesus meant now. But Martha said to him, well, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. So the Jews in general knew about an end times resurrection of believers. So recall that the prophecy showcased the Messiah as a victorious war king, a judge who would be so eternally. He would be the victorious warrior king forever. He would be the judge forever. He would be the Savior forever. And he would be a priest forever. So what would his death do to his role as a Messiah? And the answer is not much. How would his rising relate to his mission? Nothing made sense to those three at that time, I don't think. But the next revelation of Jesus' glory at his resurrection would clear up some of their confusion and their wonderment. But even then, they still will not fully understand that Jesus' earthly mission was not to restore Israel as top dog in the world. That would come after his ascension and at his return. That was found out, we found that out in Acts 1, verse 6. And so when they, the 11 disciples who were left, had come together, they were asking him, Jesus, saying, Lord, is it now, is it at this time you're restoring the kingdom to Israel? We're going to get rid of the Romans. Israel's going to be the top dog in the world politically as a physical race. They didn't ask Jesus about the resurrection on the way down the mount, but they did ask him another question. They're going to learn in Acts, after the resurrection, what he's been trying to get them to understand. But in verse 11 it says, and they ask him, saying, why is it that the scribes say that Elijah must come first? Seems like a pretty pitiful question to ask when he's just told them he's going to be resurrected from the dead. Jesus didn't give them a direct answer, I don't think, but he did give them an answer. In verse 12, and he, Jesus, said to them, Elijah does first come and restore all things. And yet, how is it written of the Son of Man that he should suffer many things and be treated with contempt? He said, Elijah's to come. He's going to set some things straight. But yet the Son of Man, the one who is the Messiah, was going to suffer and be treated with contempt. He verifies that what they've been taught about Elijah was true. He must come first. First before what? Remember that Elijah was to prepare the way for the Messiah. But interestingly, it was Yahweh he was actually told to prepare the way for. We can find that back in Malachi. First, Malachi 3:1. This is Yahweh speaking. Behold, I'm going to send my messenger, and he will clear the way before me. And the Lord whom you seek, the sovereign one whom you seek, will suddenly come to his temple, which was true of Jesus. And the messenger of the covenant, in whom you delight, because this is going to be the new covenant, behold, he is coming, says the Lord of hosts. And jumping down to verses 5 and 6 in Malachi 4, behold, I am going to send you Elijah, the prophet, before the coming of the great and terrible day of Yahweh. And he will restore the hearts of the fathers to their children, and the hearts of their children to their fathers. So he had a reconciliation task at hand. Lest I come, Yahweh says, lest I come and smite the land with a curse. So he said, I'm sending Elijah for do a job, and if that job is done, the land will not be cursed. But what about the treatment of the Son of Man mentioned in verse 12? Why must he, like Elijah, suffer and be treated with contempt? Elijah's sufferings and mistreatment was at the hands of who? Ahab and Jezebel. Jezebel particularly. While Jesus would be mistreated at the hands of the Jewish religious elite first and the Romans second. Look at 1 Kings 19, verses 1 and 2. This is about Ahab and Jezebel and Elijah. Now Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done. He had said there's going to be 3.5 years of drought and so forth. But then on Mount Carmel, he killed all the prophets of Baal with the sword. Then Jezebel, verse 2, sent a messenger to Elijah. She's getting up close and personal with Elijah, saying, so may the gods do to me, and even more, referring to the deaths of those prophets, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time. She says, I swear to the gods, I'm going to take care of you. You're going to be just as dead as my prophets were. And about that which is written of the coming Messiah, look at Isaiah 52. And this is a rather long passage, but I'm going to take the time to read it because it is focusing on Jesus. Isaiah 52, verses 13. I'm going to read through to chapter 53, verse 12. I think it's like 25 verses or so. Behold, my servant, there's that term again, will prosper. He will be high and lifted up and greatly exalted. Just as many were astonished at you, my people, so his appearance was marred more than any man. Remember, that was true of his suffering at the hands of the Romans. And his form more than the sons of men. So his appearance was marred, his form was marred. He was beaten, his back was probably, all the bones of his spine were probably exposed because of the stripping of the 4 counts of however many times he was scourged. Verse 15, thus he will sprinkle many nations. Kings will shut their mouths on account of him. For what had not been told them, they will see. What they had not heard, they will understand. He said, people are going to know what this was all about. Moving to chapter 53, verse 1. Who has believed our message? And to whom has the arm of Yahweh been revealed? For he, the servant, grew up before Yahweh like a tender shoot, and like a root. Where did I lose track of? And like a root out of parched ground, he has no stately form or majesty that we should look upon him. He's not going to be an attractive looking person after all of this. Something that grows out of dry, dusty land, a plant generally is not very attractive. Nor his appearance that we should be attracted to him. We're not attracted to him as we typically would be attracted to a man. He was despised and forsaken of men. God is speaking of this as if it's already happened, because in his mind it has. It's fixed. A man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and like one from whom men hide their face. They don't want to look him eyeball to eyeball. He was despised, and we did not esteem him, rejected him. Surely our griefs he himself bore, and our sorrows he carried. That was all dumped on him on the cross. Yet we ourselves esteemed him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. So this beating that Christ took, his suffering, was all ordained by the Father. But he was pierced through for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities, not his own. He had none, no transgression, no iniquity. The chastening for our well-being fell on him. We had no path to being right with God in and of ourselves. And by his scourging, we are healed. verse 6 of chapter 53. All of us like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way, but the Lord has caused the iniquity, sin of us all to fall on him. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he didn't open his mouth. He didn't struggle against it. Like a lamb that is led to slaughter, and like a sheep that is silent before its shearers, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. As for his generation, who considered that he was cut off out of the land of the living, for the transgression of my people, Yahweh says, to whom the stroke was due. That's what he did. He took the stroke was due us. His grave was assigned with wicked men, yet he was with a rich man in his death. Joseph of Arimathea's tomb. Because he had done no violence, nor was there any deceit in his mouth. And that's why he was buried with the rich, not with the wicked, as he normally would have. Without funds himself, he would have been buried in what's it called? The fiery pit just outside of Jerusalem. I've lost it for the most part. Starts with an H, I think. Yet he was with a rich man in his death, because he had done no violence, nor was there any deceit in his mouth. But Yahweh was pleased to crush him, putting him to grief, if he would render himself as a guilt offering, which is exactly what Jesus was doing. He will see his offspring. He is the firstborn from the dead. All of those who follow him will be considered his offspring, and he's going to lead them into and through eternity. He will prolong his days. He's going to live beyond what anyone thinks, and the good pleasure of Yahweh will prosper in his hands, because Jesus now has the number 2 spot in heaven, and he will have the number 1 spot on earth when he returns. Verse 11, as a result of the anguish of his soul, he paid a price. By his knowledge, the righteous one, my servant, will justify the many, and he will bear their iniquities. Now, this is at least 400 years before Christ, but God is laying it out to the Jews. They should have known. Therefore, I will allot him a portion with the great. God says he's going to get his pay. And he will divide the booty with the strong, because he poured out himself to death and was numbered with the transgressors, yet he himself bore the sin of many, and interceded for the transgressors. It is because of Jesus going through all that we've just described over and over again in many different ways and shapes and form. Because of that, he did pay our price. We are his spiritual offspring. He will be counted great. We already do. But then Jesus cleared up some of the confusion about Elijah. We're going back down to the four of them coming down from the mountain. Mark 9:13, but I say to you that Elijah, this is Jesus speaking, Elijah has indeed come, and they did to him whatever they wished, just as it is written of him. And he, of course, is making it clear now that John the Baptist, JB, is the one who came in the spirit of Elijah and did all that was predicted of Elijah as the forerunner for God, but actually for Jesus Christ, who is God the Son. Matthew 17:13. Then the disciples understood that he had spoken to them about John the Baptist. Earlier, Jesus said essentially the same thing in Matthew. Reading now from Matthew 11:13, Jesus speaking again, for all the prophets and all the law prophesied until John Baptist, John JB. And if you care to accept it, he is Elijah who was to come. And Gabriel to JB's father Zechariah, look at Luke 1:17. Luke's the only one who spoke of this. As it is, he who will go as a forerunner, I'm reading this not well. This is Gabriel speaking to JB's father-to-be, says, and it is he, JB, who will go as a forerunner before him, the Messiah, in the spirit and the power of Elijah. Came directly from Gabriel. And why? To turn the hearts of the fathers back to the children. Remember, that was part of the prophecy that we just read. And the disobedient, you're going to turn the disobedient to the attitude of the righteous. Those who are saved are converted to a new spiritual person. Their attitude will go toward righteousness rather than disobedience, as was the case before salvation. So as to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. So John the Baptist was going out and telling people, look, the Messiah is coming. As a matter of fact, it turns out he was there. And JB said, you ain't ready. You better get ready. And JB paid a price, rejection, suffering, and death, just as Jesus was about to undergo. Some make an interesting comparison between Moses and Elijah as they appeared at the Transfiguration and the two witnesses in Revelation. Many are saying Moses and Elijah are these two. Let's look at Revelation 11:5 and 6 and see why they might think that. It says, and if anyone desires to hurt them, that's the two witnesses, fire proceeds out of their mouth and devours their enemies. And if anyone desire to harm them in this manner, he must be killed. Though these have the power to shut up the sky in order that the rain may not fall during the days of their prophesying. Elijah did that, right? And they have the power over waters to turn them into blood, and to smite the earth with every plague. Sounds like Moses before Pharaoh. And they can do this as often as they desire. Well, it's a long session there, but it's worth it. Next time, we're going to look at the interruption that's awaiting Jesus as the four complete their descent of the mountain. You probably know what they're coming into. It's going to be an exorcism and a healing. But there's something different about that, too. We'll look at